boardroom. This is the business of esports. As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports weekly news show. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friends and co-hosts, the Honorable Judge Jimmy Barada, Jeff the Juice Cohen, and Lindsay the Boss Poss. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do is we cover all the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week. But best of all, we get to do it live with you guys. We welcome you all to join in, ask questions, challenge us, get in our faces. Obviously, we look at everything through a business and C-suite lens. We are going to dissect and analyze all the biggest news stories this week. How is everyone doing? Lindsay, start with you.
Having a great week. It's been really busy, but it's been good. Have a lot of really good podcasts coming up, and one of my favorite ones got released today. So shout out to Sarah Dope, who was an awesome episode. But yeah, been a good week. How's everyone else doing?
Jeff?
Doing good. Excited. I mean, I feel like the last 2 weeks have been just wild in the gaming industry. So I am excited to get back into it, to talk about it. And ready to jump in.
Cliff says, "Hey, Paul," but I just want to read Cliff's next comment. Wow, look at that tan. Cliff, great to have you here. Cliff is gaming and esports royalty here, and we are thrilled to have you here. But yes, this is what happens when you spend, a month in Florida. You end up looking like this. Neil says, Activision and Microsoft coming together. I need to know what the prophet thinks about this. Neil, I mean, I have had this comment now for the past 2 days, and I'm just so happy we finally get to do the live stream so I can finally tell people what I think about it, because I've been saving it. I haven't typed it out. I haven't replied to anybody. I know we all have thoughts about it, and I can't wait to hear them, including yours, Neil. I would love to hear what you think. Matt says, I know we have to talk about it. The biggest thing in the world of video games this week, the Andaseat Phantom 3 series. I mean, Matt, I know you're being sarcastic and you're making a joke, but for those who are new here, we are the leading globally the leading reviewer of gaming seats around the planet, gaming chairs. And that article, Matt, is definitely on the docket. I promise I will not leave it out. So we will get to that big news in a few. Michael says, hello, everyone. Interesting week in gaming to tune in. Michael, you did pick a good week to tune in. I have a funny feeling there are going to be some hot takes this week. Robert, hello. Great to see you here. Great to have you. All right, guys. Before we jump into the most obvious story that I think we all know we're going to talk about, I just want to tease the podcast. We had none other than Tips. For those of you who don't know, Tips, member, co-founder, in fact, and COO of OTK, which stands for One True King. They're one of the best content-focused esports orgs on the planet. Guys like Asmongold and Miskiff and SFan and Emaru. They have really some of the best content creators and streamers in their organization. He was on the podcast, talked about some of the things they're doing, talked about some of the things they're going to be doing, but so much insight into the world, I think, of gaming content and what works and what doesn't. And I really encourage everyone to tune into that podcast tomorrow. It is really good. Easily one of my favorite episodes ever. And really enjoyed it. Matt says, "Oh no joke! Oh no joke! The Business of Esports is the premier gaming chair review program." It is. Stuart says, "Oh, I've been waiting for today, Stuart. We have as well. Welcome." All right, guys. We can't delay this, right? There's no way.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. All right, let's talk about it then, guys. Here, there's obviously a million news stories I could show. There's been a million takes on this. Let me just bring up sort of the simple one here. It's New York Times. Microsoft will buy Activision-Blizzard, betting $70 billion on the future of games. This is Microsoft's biggest deal ever. What's not mentioned, I don't think this article mentions some of the details of the deal, so I will just give them to you. Microsoft's paying $95 a share, which is 45% over the company's stock price before the announcement. I think it's like about a 15% premium to the stock price today. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. But the idea here, or at least what's being reported or what's being said, is supposedly Bobby's going to stay on until the deal is complete. It's most likely then that he will step down, and obviously obviously Phil Spencer will then control this much larger group. Phil Spencer, who is currently the head of gaming at Microsoft. Before we dive into some of the auxiliary story, because there's a lot of other stories around this, right? Like how Microsoft has messaged this, what's going to happen to Bobby. There's all kinds of other sort of smaller stories. I just want to get your guys' first reaction in terms of, you love this or you hate this from a business standpoint in terms of the acquisition itself. Forget about sort of everything else around it. Jeff, I know you have strong thoughts on this, so maybe we start with you.
Yeah, I'll start. Appreciate it. I really like it. First, I guess I want to kind of say what I don't think this acquisition is about, because I've heard two sort of prevailing narratives that I generally don't think are the case. So I just want to get that out of the way to start. One, I don't think this is about the metaverse. We'll talk a lot more about this on the Meta Business podcast, but I don't think that that's what this is about, is Microsoft plotting this is part of their metaverse strategy. This was a gaming acquisition. They did talk about metaverse a little bit in the press release, but fundamentally, I think this is a gaming acquisition. Second thing I don't think this acquisition was about is making Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox. That might be a hot take. It might not. I'm actually curious to hear everyone else's thoughts. I just don't think the numbers make sense. And they even talked about it a bit. There was a number of quotes kind of in the transcript and the call that they did, talking about how they want to have the gaming community be open, and it's all about community and kind of non-exclusivity. Part of that might have just been a head nod so they don't run into any antitrust issues. But I genuinely don't think the plan is to make Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox. And I say Xbox very specifically. I do think this whole thing is about Game Pass. Now, I think they will have Call of Duty come out day one, on on Game Pass, which is something that they've done with a lot of their big franchises, obviously Halo, Gears of War. So I think this is all about getting content for the Game Pass subscription. And they snuck into the announcement that they now have 25 million Game Pass subscribers, which is a pretty astonishing number. I think it's up, from single digit millions just about a year or two ago. So I think that's what this is all about. Those are my first thoughts. I have a million others, but I'll pass the line.
Anyone want to get first thoughts in here before I push back a bit on Jeff? Because I am curious to push back.
Just offer whether or not we like it or not, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. My favorite Microsoft news of the last year was when they acquired Bethesda last year, in the middle of last year, because I'm a big Bethesda guy, and who better to take the helm, I think, than Microsoft, which really, I've been a day one Xbox fan, and I just love what they've done, so far ahead of everyone else in gaming. We talked about the Kinect on the show a while ago and what that did for streamers and just for people kind of in games that monitor your movement. When I saw this, I thought, well, culturally, how great is that? Because, they were having a lot of problems. And this is a company that I know a lot of people over at Blizzard in particular that express how excited they were for this acquisition and how hopeful they are for what that future brings. But, and then I thought, and I saw all these memes, if you guys remember that James Franco meme where he's like, all I have left is Spider-Man, and people were putting Sony across his forehead. Not only did they just win the console wars, I think they won the gaming wars, the streaming wars, the content creation wars. I just see this opening so many doors for Microsoft in terms of what they can do with these properties, with this IP, with these teams, fundamentally and from a foundational perspective, that not only are they going to integrate it into Game Pass, but this isn't a $70 billion Game Pass acquisition, right? This is going to go into many more things, whether it's generating spin-off shows, new games. I don't think any of us think they're going to cut and make it an exclusive. I would be hard pressed to find someone that thinks of that. This is massive. This isn't a small acquisition, and I'm just massively excited about it. I don't know who wouldn't think this is cool personally.
Lindsay, you think this is not cool, right?
I'm like, kind of, I guess, I don't know. I guess I'm neutral towards this. Whenever two big companies come together, sometimes it's just two big companies coming together. I don't see this as like this is definitely going to be like a huge flashbang, like changing inflection point. However, I will say Activision really needed something. So I'm excited from the aspect of I'm hoping that there's some serious changes in how they operate there. We've been talking about that for a while. I don't know that adding on Microsoft is going to be the thing that makes that happen. And I also am very skeptical of what the antitrust review and what the FTC is going to say about it. So I'm kind of cautious about how it's actually going to proceed and what that's going to look like. Jeff had a great tweet thread on that and why there shouldn't really be any antitrust scrutiny, but there will be, of course, because it's big tech.
I will say, to your point, Lindsay, there will not only will be, but the market is pricing it in, right? Like Microsoft offered $95 a share. Activision-Blizzard, I think as of today, is still trading at like $85 a share or something. The reason why it's not trading at that acquisition price, which it should, right? Because if you know you're going to get $95 for your share of Activision-Blizzard, why wouldn't you be willing to pay $86 or $87 for it? That's a no-brainer. It's because there's some fear that the deal won't close, right? Fundamentally, this is why it's still trading under its acquisition price. I guess that leads me sort of to my second question for you guys is, did they pay too much here, right? Was the price a good one? If you remember on a previous live stream, after the Bethesda acquisition happened, we were talking about Microsoft, I think, buying Discord, right? For 10 billion or 12 billion or whatever the number was. And I think a lot of the discussion was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like if Microsoft spends 20 billion on gaming, like this is so crazy for them, right? Talk about a major commitment to the space. I think they took that one and they felt, well, we can one up business of esports. We'll make a $70 billion acquisition. Was the price right here, right? And Jeff, I guess let me push this back onto you. You said this is all about Game Pass, right? Activision Blizzard's doing what, like 8 billion in revenue today, 7-8 billion in revenue today. Yeah. If all of this moves to Game Pass, we could probably do the back of the envelope math to figure out how many net new subscribers they would need to get to justify an acquisition of this size, or at least stay the same from a revenue standpoint, right? Like if we convert every Activision Blizzard game to something on Game Pass, in that context, does this feel like maybe they paid too much, or you think the price was right?
Well, it's an interesting question just at the core because there's so many different business models within Activision. Like, is WoW going to all of a sudden go to Game Pass and now there won't be the monthly subscription? Like, I'm not sure that they necessarily immediately have to do that. You also have a fair chunk of that revenue is coming from King, which is really not applicable to Game Pass just because it's free to play. Which is another interesting part of the acquisition. I think got overlooked a little bit just because of the focus on Game Pass and Call of Duty, but Microsoft really has no presence in mobile, and King kind of gives them kind of the first foothold in mobile. So that was something that I think is potentially overlooked but interesting. To get to the heart of your question, I haven't done the back of the envelope math. It is an interesting one. They paid a pretty fair premium. Good again. I'm a stand for Bobby in terms of what he's done on the business side of things, not necessarily the cultural side, of course, but good on him for getting $95 in cash. 45% premium is pretty serious. I think
pretty rich.
If they would have come out there with a $75 cash offer, I'm not too sure a lot of Activision shareholders wouldn't have taken that. So to get 95, considering I'm not sure how many other bidders there were, like credible bidders, good on Bobby and good on the the board for Activision, good for Activision shareholders. Whether it's too much, I don't know. There's a fair amount of synergies you could imagine they could pull out. Clearly, they're not going to have to pay the 30% tax to Microsoft for their game. So that right there is probably, a couple $100 million. Bobby's not going to work there anymore. So that's $100 million a year. You're,
$150 million.
Yeah. Cut that off the top, so there's a lot of, I'm joking a little bit, but there's a decent number of synergies right off the bat that, kind of make the multiple come down even further. You take away a lot of the functions internally, like you're not going to have a finance department, tax department, like a lot of the stuff that's there. You could easily find, if with Take-Two and Zynga, they were talking about 500 million of synergies. I think I think it was 100 million of synergies. You could see 250, 300 million of annual synergies pretty easily, which will do a lot to take down the multiple that they paid.
Well, I see two comments here that, let me just read some of these. Stuart says this is about content. No chance they wouldn't cut the revenue. I think I agree. It's obviously definitely about the games, right? It's about content. I want to have this discussion around, is it all about Game Pass? Because I think that's definitely one of those, one of the best reasons to argue for this acquisition. Antonio says 70 billion was a great price, a drop in the bucket for Microsoft. I don't know if 70 billion is ever a drop in the bucket. Just to be for full information, Microsoft was sitting on about 130 billion of cash reserves. So, they needed, I guess they were looking to do something with this, to spend more than half of it on one acquisition. I think, I don't know if we can call it a drop in the bucket, but it's, they definitely had the cash lying around for it. Jimmy, you have a thought here?
I just think it's a good point, but it's to me it's less about the ability to pay for it and more about the value of what they got for it. William is famous for equating everything to like how many Star Wars is this and bringing things into Disney terms. And I just it probably
is
grinds
this 17
Lindsay's...
Star Wars.
It's a lot of Star Wars.
Is this worth 17 Star Wars?
I personally don't
in
think
that
so.
context, did they overpay?
The funniest part is he uses Star Wars, but Marvel was the same price and would be like a 20 times better example because Marvel is definitely
is it
worth
17 Marvels?
No. But Marvel is not worth what Disney paid for. Marvel is probably worth 50 Marvels.
Yeah, it's probably the only time we're giving Bobby credit on this show is got a great price, I think, for what they had.
Well, no, I think in the context of saying, is it worth 17 Marvels? Microsoft overpaid, but then you see sort of Greg's point here is shares were trading above 96 months ago before Bobby's latest problems. You could make the argument that they got out at a time when the stock was at its most depressed, right? And while they did get a 45% premium, right, they got $95 a share. Could they have got $125 or $110 when they were sitting at 90?
Well, we've also criticized that stock price and their recent strategies about short-term sales and profits against the long-term success of the business, particularly with COD, with the COD League buy-in fees, right? I thought we had really picked that apart in the past that, yeah, the stock looks great now and COD League, COD Mobile, et cetera, are all doing well, but what's the long-term play here? It's eventually not sustainable.
But I think this is the genius of Bobby in this, right? And I'm going to make a point that I could also sort of poke holes in because I think the rumor is that Bobby didn't want the deal right? That the board basically decided that this was the right deal, and he didn't have enough power essentially over the board to do anything different there. But if this was his doing, it's genius, right? Because you get he's grown the business significantly. He's benefited from that obviously personally in a huge way, but he's mortgaged the future of the business because let's face it, today Activision-Blizzard is not in the business of making games. They're really not in any business today. And he's mortgaged the future of the business, but then he sells before that future arrives. I mean, if I'm going to give him any credit, it's pretty brilliant, right? Like, talk about good timing. And if we say timing is important in business, this could go down as maybe some of the best timing ever. Jeff, you're looking at me like I know you're the Bobby apologist here.
No, I think you make a good point. I mean, one thing I think Clifford actually makes a good point here, and this is something I was going to mention. So much of the value in Activision Blizzard right now is in kind of the longer term pipeline, particularly on the Blizzard side. I'm really interested to see, given this deal is not going to close for kind of at least almost a year, how does the talent exodus we've seen from Blizzard and Activision, does that accelerate? Or do a lot of the developers there say, hey, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're excited about Microsoft. Like, how do those games come out of the oven? You know what I mean? Because there was a lot of issues on the Blizzard side already. I could easily paint a picture where things actually get worse because you're in limbo. Like Microsoft's going to have a lot of wood to chop. And I don't even know how you do this in an acquisition that clearly it's not closing for a year. So I don't know how much Microsoft can do in terms of incentivizing people to stay and stuff like that. It's going to be very interesting to watch when you have a transition like this, dealing with an acquisition, just from a people perspective. Like, are those developers incentivized to stay? Or we know there's a ton of money sloshing around the system. There's a lot of other publishers, developers looking to hire. There's blockchain gaming, which is massive right now. You could see even more of an exodus, which to Clifford's point, or sort of what he was alluding to, that makes this acquisition even more troubling if a lot of the values in that longer term pipeline that may not actually come and won't come very well.
Let me just get caught up here. Stuart says, are a number of the games on the way down in popularity and therefore Microsoft going to have to invest to rejuvenate a lot of the content which carries risk of failure to improve subscription numbers in Game Pass? I mean, Stuart, it's a great question. I think obviously, like if they put WoW on Game Pass, that's going to drive a huge number of subscribers, right? There's no question you get a few million subscribers immediately, which are all the existing, WoW players. But I also think you would get people who see a lot of more value in Game Pass if you put something like that there. The question is, and let me just rephrase your question so I can ask it to everyone here is, will Microsoft help Activision Blizzard get back to making games? And Jeff, you just mentioned, obviously some of the struggles that are created by being in limbo for a year here before this deal actually closes. But, what do we think Microsoft's chances are of being able to restore sort of Activision Blizzard's place from a game development standpoint? And I don't mean King, even though mobile is important, but really more Blizzard here in terms of restoring that development studio to its former glory. Can Microsoft do it?
Lindsay, you go.
Yeah, I really feel like there's just a lot riding on Phil Spencer's shoulders and on his reputation. I mean, everyone believes he's the man who can get things done, and he has a proven track record. There's a reason why people believe that, so this is not a knock on him. But there's just a lot of this deal, I feel like, is riding on his ability to manage all of these various things, which I think he has the ability to do, but he's also only one person. So I'm curious to see the role that they have him playing in that, and how the expectations of him will play into how people actually work on these games. I think it could be a good motivator too.
The problem is we're lacking a data point, right? Because we don't really know if Bethesda has really seen a turnaround internally, right? Like, we haven't seen any great new game from them since they were bought by Microsoft. So, like, I feel like that's one data point. If we had it, I think there'd be a lot more comfort in saying, oh, okay, we saw the Microsoft playbook with Bethesda. They're just going to apply it here. I'm not sure if that playbook exists. I have lots of faith in Phil Spencer, but like, we haven't really seen much from Bethesda, have we? That was a big acquisition, and other than some nice ads on TV, going we're better together. I don't know what's come out of that. That causes a bit of concern in my mind that maybe Microsoft doesn't have the magic touch with game development studios. Jimmy, sorry.
No, you're good. Bethesda did announce that Starfield release date for the end of this year that I'm looking forward to. You got a space age RPG, but they're good points. I just think that they're not necessarily deserved because these aren't like indie publishers. This isn't an acquisition of a mid-tier or a small tier company that you're going to need to hold their hand and bring them across the line. These guys have put out massive it's a multi-billion-dollar property. They've put out these massive titles where I don't think it's going to require the amount of hand-holding that this discussion is kind of indicating. I think you're going to have to replace a lot of the people that left during that exodus. I think that's going to be easy to do because of the attractiveness of Microsoft and of Phil, where even if he's not directly running certain, micromanaging certain things, that he can attract that talent the way a coach for a popular D1, football program in college will attract that talent. And then you wind them up and they kind of run themselves. The more interesting part, or personally where I think the discussion is and where the interest is how does this integrate with Microsoft's other properties? It's not whether or not they're going to have another good game. I think that's a given. I think it's how else is this going to play out through, how else are they going to monetize this IP? For me, that's like the unknown. Because again, I think it's
that's a big unknown.
Put out good titles.
Well,
yeah,
that's a big
unknown for Microsoft, right? It's not like we're not talking about Disney buying Activision-Blizzard, right? Like, what's the last time Microsoft put out a Netflix like hit?
That's Jeff? Why I think this. Oh, Jeff, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say I think one thing for sure we're going to see a lot more games coming out. Like, I don't think you're going to like Activision. You have to remember has a ton of IP that's not being utilized. Because, and I think, to Bobby's credit, he did what he had to do to squeeze out earnings and near-term kind of strong return on capital. And the stock, again, to give him credit, when he bought the company in 1990, he bought it for $400,000. He's selling it 2022 for $70 billion. So, like, incredible capital allocator. But I think there's a ton of unused IP that now that you have Game Pass and you have Microsoft with a ton of resources, I think you're going to see things like Tony Hawk come back. I know Activision just did they did a re-release of that, but you'll see more of that. You'll see Crash Bandicoot come out. You'll see, I'm sure you guys could name 20 other Activision IPs. One of the things I saw in an interview that Bobby did with GamesBeat that I thought was interesting, he talked about how he, in the last couple of years, had really wanted to remake Guitar Hero, and he was frustrated that he didn't feel like he had the resources to kind of do that, just because of the hardware that was necessary in the supply chain and the manufacturing and the chip shortages. But his comment was like, at a studio like Microsoft, you could go do something like that because you have those resources. He said the same thing about Skylanders, which I thought was interesting. That a company like Microsoft would be a lot better positioned to take that IP forward versus Activision. And I just thought those comments were notable because I think a lot of times Bobby gets this sort of rep of a guy who doesn't care about games or is just ruthless in killing IP and, killing games and studios. And maybe the reality is he's making business decisions for shareholders that he maybe regrets from a personal perspective or from a nostalgia and loving games perspective, but knows he has to do it from a business perspective. And I think under Microsoft, some of those choices could maybe be different based on the economics.
Let me just get caught up, guys, on some comments here. Andrew says, any thoughts on what this could mean for COD and Overwatch League? That's a good question. Really good question, Andrew. Who here thinks COD and Overwatch League get better under Microsoft sort of rule? Lindsay?
I think there's a decent chance they get axed, actually.
Interesting. Why?
Maybe not. I don't know. I think there's a pretty decent chance that they look at the numbers and they're like, why are we doing this when you guys haven't even been able to put out any games?
I'd say there's a 0% chance they get axed, but I will say that there is a decent chance that the entire thing gets outsourced, because I just don't think the leagues will disappear, right? These owners just spend so much money on it.
I don't know. Axe was too strong of a word, but outsource is a better way of putting it. Like I think what I'm saying is I think there's I think there's a high chance of extremely dramatic change.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think that Microsoft, there is a very good chance they take a look at it and say, this isn't a business we want to be in, which I think could actually be an opportunity for the owners, right? Because let me take it back. Not the biggest problem, but one of the big problems with these leagues is the rev share, right? The fact that Activision was taking, 50% or whatever of the profits plus the ownership fees and all that. If instead the leagues got outsourced or Microsoft didn't care about making money off them, which if we think about Microsoft, like there's a decent chance they say, hey, we want this ecosystem. We're not that concerned about making 50% of whatever this small rev share is. We'd rather have this vibrant community, a la exactly what Riot does. I think there's a decent chance that you could see that, and it actually could be really positive for both the owners and the leagues.
Can I ask an offshoot question of this, which is, if you remember when we had the Microsoft Discord conversation, we were like, in the context of a world where Microsoft spends $20 billion, that was the number we were throwing around, right? Because it was 8 for Bethesda and 12 for Discord. In that world, like, how crazy is it that they shut down Mixer? In the context of Activision-Blizzard, the Activision-Blizzard acquisition, are we thinking the Mixer shutdown is even crazier? Like, does in this context, does this now seem completely misguided?
Paul, you must be reading my tweets, because I literally tweeted exactly that at 6:45 tonight. Hashtag Jeff Cohen 23 on Twitter, starting to get a lot more active. Go give it a follow, give it a like. I don't have any comment on that.
Did you just say hashtag Jeff Cohen?
Yeah, it's what you do on Twitter. You hashtag things, you at things.
Hashtag the juice. Hashtag
still figuring it
you
all
got
out.
juiced. Hashtag, yeah. Jimmy, did you have thoughts on the Mixer shutdown?
Yeah. I think hindsight is kind of a difficult thing to reconcile with, because if they had acquired Activision first and then had the before Mixer was shut down, there's a lot of opportunities there now. There would be a lot of opportunities to force or to better support those properties, those games from Activision Blizzard through a streaming platform like Mixer. The money doesn't kind of chuckle me, so to speak, or tickle me, because it's a really valuable property. It's more just like, what is the strategy, I think, is the question, right? Because owning this massive property and these titles, yeah, I mean, I guess they don't want to be in streaming, but they do want to be in game making. I got a lot of questions about that one personally, honestly. And Discord too. Like, Discord seemed like it was going to be a good acquisition also. Every time Microsoft does or doesn't do something, it's hard to make heads or tails of it for me personally, because I don't see what someone said in the comment, what that 5 to 10 year plan is. We only see what the immediate plan is. I did want to speak really briefly too on the league side of things, on COD League. They are launching that Halo Championship series, or whatever they're calling it. And so, to your point, we don't have a data or significant data on that yet, but it doesn't, I don't think they're going to shut it down. They're probably going to outsource it like they do with Halo.
I think that Discord acquisition is now far more likely, right? They're now $78 billion into gaming. What's another 20 at this point, or 25, or whatever, Discord will sell for at this point. And I could see the integration with Xbox, right? It's the whole communication and social piece of it. I actually think that acquisition now is much more likely. Cliff says, you guys are discussing the immediate benefits. Companies like Microsoft need to look at 5 to 10 year increments. It's really a good point. They have technology we haven't seen. And as Jeff said, the mobile space is very attractive. I mean, this is a great point, and I think it's worth discussing. Like, who here thinks that this is really more about a 10, let me use the extreme here, more of a 10-year time horizon kind of play? Jeff, you mentioned at the beginning, you said, hey, this is not about the metaverse. I saw articles saying this is about the metaverse, right? Like that was the sort of the clickbaity headline. I'm curious in this context of, maybe this is more about a 10-year time horizon, and it's about tech that we don't know about yet and initiatives we don't know about yet. do you think this is? Why do you think this isn't a metaverse play? Like, what's your argument there?
It gets deep into how we define sort of the metaverse. I mean, I think there's a chance that Satya Nadella and Microsoft may be viewing this as a metaverse play, but from the perspective of how we have sort of defined the metaverse, capital T, capital M, I don't think it's a metaverse play. Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes down to if I last week came to you, Paul, and said, "Hey, is Activision a metaverse?" You would have laughed me out of the room and said, "Bobby doesn't make games. Warcraft's dying. Call of Duty sucks." So it feels very.
I mean, I'd still say that today, to be honest.
Exactly. Well, that's why it feels very disingenuous today to wake up and say, "Oh, this is a massive metaverse acquisition," when none of us would have called Activision a metaverse play prior. So you have to stick to our priors.
Let me just read some of these. Michael says MGL CDL was part of the acquisition. I wonder what Microsoft plans to do with that. Are you talking about Call of Duty League, Michael?
I think it's MLG.
Yeah,
Is that what
he meant? Yeah.
Maybe if you could just clarify, I want to make sure we answer your question. Antonio says Microsoft makes that money back in 5 to 10 years, I think. I mean, sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
No, I like that thought, and I was going to pose that to the group too. What do you think is the timetable for that?
I mean, it can't be much more than 10 years because otherwise the acquisition doesn't make sense. I think it wouldn't have passed mustard at Microsoft. A lot of it, I think, to Jeff's point, does hinge on the growth of Game Pass. Fundamentally, Game Pass has to see massive growth. Like if Jeff, you mentioned the number, right? They said they have 25 million subscribers today. At an average of $10 a month, that's 250 million in revenue a month on Game Pass today. That's, $3 billion a year on Game Pass. Is my math right? Yeah, $3 billion on Game Pass.
No, that's not nearly enough.
It's right. Like they would have to double, triple, quadruple, the size of Game Pass subscriptions in my mind to justify this acquisition. So can you go from 25, like back of the envelope math, right? Can you go from 25 million to 100 million subscribers, or maybe that's too extreme, but like to 50 to 100 million subscribers on Game Pass? What is how many subscribers on Netflix today? Like we're talking about Netflix scale kind of number of subscribers. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just think it's a tall order, right? The value you'd have to drive with Game Pass would have to be really, really compelling, I think, for everybody, right? Not just the hardcore gamers, not just the most casual gamers. It really needs to reach everyone at that point. I mean, Jeff, do you agree that that's this kind of scale that Game Pass would have to get to justify
I agree.
this?
I mean, I don't know if the math is it's not exactly that, because obviously more people you bring into the ecosystem, you're making more on microtransactions. They get a cut of that. Also, there's some, even though I said Call of Duty won't go exclusive on Xbox, I think some of the titles could. Plus maybe there's some things they could do with some of the Blizzard titles, maybe, bring them into their own launcher, kind of create maybe like a Microsoft Windows store. I'm trying to think of ancillary benefits. There's some creative things they could do with Call of Duty, maybe have some content exclusive to try to win kind of the platform war, I think, as Jimmy alluded to in the beginning. Because obviously if you get more people to buy Xboxes, you're making more money on third-party games, even the ones you don't own. So,
guys, I want to read a couple of these comments here, but I think this next one brings up the question I had next. First one, this one, my favorite, #TheJuice, love it. Yeah, we got to get #TheJuice going here. Stuart says, how do you see it impacting Sony? Stuart, let me broaden your question, because I want everyone to chime in on not just how will it impact Sony, but how do we think this, like, who does this negatively impact, right? Because Sony's stock price, I think, dropped 20% the day it was announced, something like that. I don't know if it's still down 20%.
I think it dropped
recovered
$20 billion, which I don't know what that was in percentage, but something like that.
Right. So they lost $20 billion in market cap on this announcement.
I think it was less than, yeah.
First of all, so I'm curious how you guys, other than the huge stock price drop, how do you see it impacting Sony? and who else gets negatively impacted by this sort of tie-up, right? Who else maybe suffers as a consequence of Microsoft and Activision Blizzard coming together? Lindsay, Jimmy, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I don't know that I thought about who suffers, but I certainly thought about what other acquisitions are going to be made and what other entertainment companies, other technology companies are going to be on the lookout for. And
like, are you implying that EA is going to be acquired any day now as a consequence, you think?
I don't know about any day, but
Google buys EA?
I definitely think that some of the FANG companies might reevaluate and look for something else to buy. I mean, we joked about Google buying Activision Blizzard like 2 weeks ago, I think. So I don't know that I see it as a negative for any of these companies. I think I see it as a reframing of strategy for sure, though, or a potential reframing of strategy.
I saw someone wrote an article about this, and I'm not even sure if it was serious or a joke, but what are the odds we see Game Pass go on to PlayStation?
Sorry,
and you may think that you may think it sounds crazy. What are the odds that PlayStation?
You think Xbox Game Pass gets offered on PlayStation?
I'm not saying I think that. I'm saying what are the odds? Like, is it possible?
Well, look.
And let me explain.
Spencer,
sort of why. So from Microsoft's perspective, I think this is where you're going. They want Game Pass everywhere. They want, they've been pretty open about
publicly.
I think they put it on. I think they put it on Switch, right?
And Phil Spencer has come out and said, we want people to get Game Pass as many places as possible. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but he has basically said that.
We agree. It makes sense, or at least they've shown a willingness to do that. From Sony's perspective, if now everyone is saying you've lost the console war, well, why not put Xbox Game Pass on your PlayStation? Keep people in your ecosystem, open it up to content.
Does it really?
Some sort of rev share.
Because you may have a PlayStation today, right? And you may go get Game Pass on your PlayStation because now you can play all these games on Game Pass, right? But when you go to buy that next console, that next gen console, are you going to be like, I'm going to buy another PlayStation? Or are you going to buy the console that's like, it's native and probably the frame rates are better and there's stuff built in and, it comes bundled with Game Pass anyways. And, there's probably 12 reasons why you'll switch at that point.
To be fair, that's in like 8 years, right? Like, we just got into a console. Like, at least that gives me a chance. And to be fair, like, things change pretty quickly. Like 18 months ago, everyone was like, Sony has the best exclusive content and all Microsoft has is some Game Pass crap and subscription and cloud, and nobody knows what the hell they're doing. They're buying random studios. Now all of a sudden it's like Microsoft has all the studios and Microsoft won the console war. So, like, I don't know, things change fast. And also, for Sony, you still have exclusive content, like some really, really strong exclusive content. So if Microsoft was willing to put Game Pass on your console, wouldn't that give you a really good leg up because you have your exclusive content plus Microsoft's content?
I mean, does Microsoft offer the life preserver to the sinking ship? Will they look at it that way, or will they see it as just an opportunity to sell more Game Pass? Jimmy, I don't know if you have thoughts.
I think if Sony's exclusives weren't doing the trick now, offering Game Pass isn't going to be that ace in the hole for them or that saving grace. I'm just putting it into like my own personal experience. Like, I've played Sony's for those exclusive. I've played PlayStation. I've gotten PlayStations to try out those exclusives, and after I beat it, I sold the PlayStation and I sold all the peripherals. If I had the Game Pass available to me on that PlayStation, that might make me more likely. Well, I see Jeff's point, right? Because then you would still have the exclusives for the next round and still have access. To me, it just seems so against Sony fundamentally on what they would want to do. It was the biggest surprise ever that they got into Fortnite and then other cross-platform games. So now this is like an even larger step in that direction. I'm not saying it's not clever or not a good idea. I'm just saying these companies also have cultures, and it's not just like they're the enemy or this person's the enemy or this is a good business decision. It's also just fundamentally, what's their character or what's the their demographic, their culture that they relate with.
I guess to put it differently, in your opinion, who says no? I think if anyone, it would be Microsoft, but we kind of just went over how this is in their culture. So who says no?
But I think none of this really matters in the sense that, like, if we want to declare that Xbox, like, let me just read this. Andrew says, sounds like Xbox won the console war, right? And I actually think that's a fair statement because they're in a no-lose scenario right now, right? If they put Xbox Game Pass on PlayStation, they're still winning, right? They're selling a lot of $10 a month subscriptions, and Sony just becomes another vehicle, right? They're not really in the war anymore if everyone's just running Xbox Game Pass on their PlayStations. If Microsoft doesn't give them Game Pass, well, I think a lot of people are going to move to Microsoft and Xbox for Game Pass or for the exclusives, for the Activision-Blizzard games, for all these things, if they decide to keep it exclusive on Xbox. And then Microsoft has also won the console war in that case. Like, I don't think it matters what they do. I think they've won either way. I don't know if you guys have thoughts to the contrary.
An argument that this is why I'm surprised that you guys are talking about the value of the acquisition as being too high. Because all the things that come with it, and we're talking about, they'll make their money back in 10 years. So what if they overpaid today if they're going to make it back tomorrow?
I mean, there's always opportunity, meaning could they have spent that $70 billion on some other acquisition or acquisitions that might have been more accretive, whether short-term or long-term? Like, there's a lot of discussion to be had around that. I think it's a clear sign that Microsoft has more conviction than any of the other big tech companies when it comes to gaming, right? The fact of the matter, they've spent more money than anyone else in this space, whether it was Bethesda, whether it was Mojang Studios, whether it was or now Activision-Blizzard. No one else has invested the amount of dollars that Microsoft has. It's one of these things where if you're looking at just the big tech companies, if we're looking at Google, Facebook, Microsoft, right? Like, if we're looking at the big, what we call big tech, Is anyone even close to Microsoft today in terms of a thesis around gaming and the action to back it up?
No, I mean, not even close. Maybe you could say Amazon. They're not even close, but you could. They're the second.
Right, like the reality is they seem to be running away with this. The question becomes, who are the winners and losers now down the line? Is, Lindsay, you mentioned, I think you're going to see a lot more acquisitions now on the games too, already more than we were already seeing, right? Does EA come into play? Maybe Take-Two, right? Now Take-Two has Zynga. So, is someone going to go pay 40 or 50 billion for Take-Two? I don't know, right? Like, do all these studios, big public gaming companies come into play for big tech? And then who loses, right? Who are the losers in this?
It's a good thought, and because this is one of the major players, one of the more established that's now off the table. And I would bet you a lot of people didn't even think that acquiring Activision was even an option. And I want to point real quick to Amazon and Amazon Game Studios, which has had so much trouble over the years. And I mean, Paul, we had Facebook Gaming's head of strategy and operations on the podcast 2 weeks ago. If you haven't listened to the episode with John Pan, go take a listen. Before John was running Facebook Gaming, from the strategy and operations perspective, he was up high at Amazon Game Studios. And for half the show, he just talked about the problems over at Amazon. So I feel like Amazon's one of those losers because they have a lot of problems in game development. And here is a AAA publisher and one of the most well-known names in the industry. And Amazon probably wasn't even thinking, oh, we can acquire them right now. They're in a lot of trouble and this could bail us out. That's my quick knee-jerk thought on the matter. But I want to run this by. If only we had John on the show next week, that I would love to get his perspective on how this affects, because he's been with Riot, he's been with Amazon, right? He's been with EA, he's currently at Facebook. I think these are all the players. When you talk about who benefits and who gets hurt, there's a very small pool of companies we can pull from and talk to, because there's a very small amount that can either afford this or that can afford to compete at this level, right? So the names naturally are going to be the Amazons, the Googles, the Sonys, And for me, immediately, I think Amazon, because every time I've heard about anything coming out of Amazon Game Studios, with the exception of New World, which is having its fair share of problems right now, it's largely been negative. And this seems like something that could have addressed those issues for them.
The joke right now is not New World, it's Who World. Stuart says, would this have been a better move for Netflix? It's a great question.
Great question.
There's not new. Well, I don't think. I mean, I've been as big a proponent of, hey, Netflix needs to make a big move. So I think it would have been a good move for Netflix, but it would not have been a better move because I think there's just so much more immediate synergies with what Microsoft has and kind of just the whole Xbox platform. Plus Microsoft, it's a much higher probability that this acquisition will succeed under Microsoft and kind of the leadership team and just the structure there than if you just threw it into Netflix and we're like, hey, go build games and we have nobody to actually run it unless Bobby was going to like eventually take over for Reed Hastings.
That's is that fair though? Because it matches the exact argument you made for Microsoft, which is it's all about subscriptions, right? And this could have been just as good of a plug-in for Netflix's game subscription or whatever, right? As for maybe not as good, but like definitely as compelling. And the reverse of this is Netflix a loser in this because they missed out on this, right? Will they now struggle to maybe fill their own version? Will they struggle to long-term have a competitor to Xbox Game Pass?
I don't think Netflix, I think it goes back to like what I was saying about culture with Sony. I don't think Netflix's gaming culture is going to parallel the hardcore gamer, the FPS gamer. I think it's going to be more akin to Apple's Game Arcade or whatever they're calling it, which is more passive and mobile. So I don't see, to me, what nailed it was your comment, Paul, like Microsoft not only is like one of the granddaddies of gaming, but they're now like undeniably cemented from every entry point and perspective, right? So I don't really see Netflix as being hurt or a potential buyer just because they both sell subscriptions. Like, yeah, it's a business model, but the subscription Netflix sells me is very different than the subscription Game Pass sells, other than fundamentally that they're both like a leasing based model. Netflix is selling these games for people that are really just watching their content. It's a way to not lose viewers, right? The same with Apple subscription. These are mobile gamers. They're passive gamers. Game Pass is for someone that's going to put in 20, 30 hours on a hardcore, RPG or I just think they're different gamers that are buying the subscriptions.
Does this sway you at all, guys? Sorry, Lindsay. I don't know. Go ahead. I'm curious to hear your
this
thoughts
is actually good. That was a good this is a good bolster to my point or whatever. I actually think that it's also, I would go against Stuart's point here and say that it actually limits Netflix in partnering with other studios and other games that come up as well. They've partnered now. They've done The Witcher. They've done Arcane. I mean, Riot's not going to go back to them if they have Activision-Blizzard under their belt. So for Netflix, it offers them more of a variety of options to actually create their preferred form of content, which is shows around all of these different gaming IPs. And then I was just thinking about when it comes to other companies acquiring it, Google just doesn't have, I wouldn't trust Google with this acquisition either. I really do think there's a little bit of magic within the Phil Spencer and Xbox direction. And if they were going to partner with anyone, as Activision Blizzard has been, this seems like the way to go. I don't know. I'm just thinking about like Google's different projects like Stadia and Loon and the things that have kind of failed that have been out there. And I don't think that would have been a good culture fit either. The same way Jimmy was talking about how Sony wouldn't also get a good culture, wouldn't also be a good culture fit.
Michael, I think that's a good point, Lindsay. They may have fewer options, or people might be less willing to work with them. Michael has an interesting point here as well. I think Tencent will reply with another big acquisition. It could be EA. Only time will tell. I mean, Tencent's definitely in the mix, right? Does this embolden them in some way?
I think they're blocked from a regulatory perspective, both from the U.S. and their own. I don't know if the Chinese government would allow them to do such a large acquisition, just given what we've seen in terms of their unwillingness to be friendly to that industry. So I doubt that it would get through on either side. Like if Tencent went to go buy EA, it would be very surprising.
So get our tinfoil hats or our crystal balls out here. What does this lead to in terms of who's the next big target? What's the next huge transaction that we see potentially among AAA developers as a consequence of this transaction? Jeff, go ahead.
I have one. Disney finally buys Nintendo.
Hey, you stole that from me.
That's what's going on.
What was the second part?
His one tweet.
And then Apple buys them both.
And then Apple buys them both.
Just saying.
Lindsay, did you have thoughts, or did Jeff steal it?
He stole it. I was the one who said Nintendo's the next to get bought.
I literally tweeted that last night. Come on.
Oh, I didn't.
Everyone has to go follow me because I am just all about
juice.
Content. Juice.
Hashtag you got juiced.
Juice.
I truly did not see that when I sent that message. Wait, I sent that message yesterday. What are you talking about? I sent it yesterday morning. Anyways, I did immediately think about Microsoft trying to buy Nintendo and that deal failing, and about Nintendo laughing them out of the room, and thought, oh, I wonder if Nintendo's going to be either laughing anyone else out of the room or falling into getting bought sometime soon.
Jimmy?
I mean, if anyone wants to buy Atari, I bet the price is right there. So I would. I don't know if
I'd call that a major acquisition at this point. Greg says, agree with Jeff. Tencent wouldn't pass U.S. or Chinese regulators. Apple buys EA for move into sports. That's an interesting one. I'm going to say Facebook buys EA because I also think Facebook has ambition in the sports world, or an Amazon buying EA because Amazon already has significant investments in the sports world. But I definitely think EA is probably next on the target list, and I think to Greg's point, it's definitely for the sports content. Would be my guess. Would be my prophecy, I guess. Guys, any other thoughts on this before that I didn't touch on, or any other questions from you guys that we didn't touch on before we move on here? Do you buy the idea that this was all sort of to make the bad news around the company go away?
I mean, that was the most disappointing part for me, was that Xbox and Phil Spencer had come out and said, we disavow what's happening in Activision-Blizzard not that long ago, and then they bought them. And Bobby's staying on, and it's, these things happen and nobody loses except for the people that get hurt. The people in charge never lose. But
Lindsay, can I put my very cynical tinfoil hat on, right?
Of course.
Because if I'm Phil Spencer, right, and I know that I want to buy Activision-Blizzard. Well, what's like when you go to buy a car, you don't go and tell the car salesman, "Oh my God, I love this car. I'll pay whatever you want." Right? You go, I don't know. There's a little scratch here. Like, what is this?
But then everyone's congratulating Bobby on the high price. So they, in fact, did go to the car and say, wow, it's so great, even though we hate you.
But maybe, Phil's move.
Perfect. Well,
I imagine most of the people who work at Activision have a decent amount of stock. So, this is a win for them. And I think that working at Microsoft seems like a really good place. And Phil Spencer seems like he's building a pretty strong culture. So it seems like a step in the right direction, regardless if you're an Activision employee. Albeit now you're a much smaller fish in a gigantic pond. So there's always, the grass is always greener.
Sorry, go ahead, Jimmy.
The number one winner is Bobby. You know what I mean? Like, not only to Jeff's point about buying it in the 90s and what he just sold it for, but in the next 20 years, you will unfortunately remember less about their recent corporate culture and allegations and investigations, and you'll just remember this massive acquisition and what Microsoft did with it, as well as their fundamental underlying properties and the nostalgia that comes into play with all of those. There was a little chance that Bobby was going to keep his job. I think he even came out saying, as soon as they find a replacement, I'll transition out, and this he's the number one winner here. This was a
I
brilliant.
mean, just to be fair to Bobby, like I
Brilliant
don't know if we
play.
should like paint Bobby as like Jeffrey Epstein here in this instance. I mean, there's a lot of find me a company in the gaming, and I don't mean to make a joke of any of these allegations by any stretch, just to be clear, but like find me a company in the gaming space that hasn't had problems with this, unfortunately. So like I don't think it's necessarily fair to like make Bobby as too much of a villain, given he hasn't really been personally implicated in any of this per se.
No,
culture comes from the top.
He is going to come out very well financially. Like I think his salary was about 150. Like his comp was about 150 million. His stock's going to be worth about 300 to 400 million. That I saw 400 million, I think was the number. And then I guess he's going to get some kind of golden parachute for being pushed out, which TBD how much that is. But my guess is he walks away with on the order of $1 billion, something like that.
Yeah, total. I don't think anyone's being too hard on Bobby. I think he's just fine.
But every shareholder of Activision-Blizzard, including all the employees, are also going to do very well. All right, guys, we can let me just read these two comments. Greg says Microsoft mentioned the importance of culture numerous times in that call. Said everything except Activision Blizzard culture needed improving. Interesting. I mean, I would hope that they improve the culture. Stuart says, what about 2K? That's Take-Two. And so I think Take-Two with Zynga becomes a more attractive acquisition target. And maybe that was Strauss's play all along. That maybe having the mobile component makes them more attractive to the big tech companies. That would be very clever, right? If he gets a big price tag for Take-Two off the heels of this acquisition, that would be quite the coup, I think. I had one last thing here, guys. I had the letter because the one last thing I wanted to mention, we talk a lot about Phil Spencer in the context of this, but fundamentally, I think we are not giving enough credit to Satya Nadella, who has done pretty miraculous things with Microsoft since he started, has really transformed the company. And this feels like in line with his vision, not just the obvious focus on gaming, but like moving everything to a service, right? Even Windows is like a service now. And so Game Pass like fits in this sort of thesis that I feel like he's got around this. But there was a very nice letter, which I will post the link here if you guys want to read. They posted it in its entirety on The Verge. And I think it's really interesting what Satya said about the acquisition, and I'll read just a bit of it. It says, "Team, I'm thrilled to share that this morning we announced an agreement to acquire Activision-Blizzard." He goes on to talk about some of the properties that they have. He says, "Gaming has been key to Microsoft since our earliest days as a company. Today, it's the largest and fastest growing form of entertainment. And as the digital and physical worlds come together, it will play a critical role in the development of metaverse platforms." So he does mention metaverse in his letter. He says, "Together with Activision Blizzard, we believe we have an incredible opportunity to bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet, and we will invest and innovate to create the best content, community, and cloud for gamers." This is content, community, and cloud seems to be sort of the recurring theme in his communication. He says, "We want to make it easier for people to connect and play great games wherever, whenever, and however they want." He says, "Effective today, Phil Spencer will become CEO Microsoft Gaming," which is interesting because to have a CEO title within Microsoft also shows, I don't think they have a CEO for even their Windows division. And says, sorry, I lost my place here. Says, "When the acquisition closes, the Activision Blizzard business will report to Phil. We look forward to extending our journey to create a more diverse and inclusive culture to our new colleagues at Activision Blizzard and ensuring all our employees can do what they love while thriving in a safe and welcoming environment, one where everyone feels empowered to do their best work." So, definitely touched, I think, on all the big sort of highlights, right? It was metaverse long-term kind of thesis. It was short-term culture and diversity and inclusion, right? So we address that. And somewhere in between, this talk about content, community, and cloud. I I'll go out and say it. I really admire the way he's thinking about these things, even if the communication obviously is very well crafted here. It seems he gets it. And that to me is the strongest sort of way I could back, what Microsoft is doing here. I don't know if anyone else gets it. I have not heard any other big tech CEO that seems to understand the opportunity the way Microsoft does. He didn't come out and say this is the future of gaming. He didn't come out, you know what I mean? There was no hyperbole. This was very matter of fact and understanding what was actually happening here. Lindsay, I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, you clearly didn't watch Mark Zuckerberg's hour-long "We Are Now Meta" video, which very succinctly said all of what Satya Nadella was saying, and even more.
Look,
No,
I think Zuck is a visionary, so I wouldn't bet against him either. But I thought this was well crafted.
This is much more brief and strategic, and I will give him credit for that.
Stuart says, is he looking back to Minesweeper when reflecting on the gaming heritage? I mean, Stuart, don't knock it. This maybe have been, Minesweeper and Solitaire may have been some people's real first intro to gaming. So I wouldn't necessarily knock it. Guys, I know we spent like an hour on that. So I want to say one quick word. This live stream, very generously supported by the folks at YouGov. If you're working in or around the gaming industry, YouGov produces some of the best data on gamers, games, esports fans around the world. They produce really actionable data. So if you're a brand, you're an esports team, you're someone working, an investor, someone working in and around the gaming industry, definitely reach out to them. We can help you connect you to them, whether you reach out to me, to Jimmy, to Jeff, to Lindsay, any of us can make an introduction. But you can also check out yougov.com/gaming-esports. They have a ton of free reports, which I encourage you all to check out. All kinds of free data there. yougov.com/gaming-esports. I will also tease when the podcast drops tomorrow. There's a link in that podcast, whether you're listening to it or watching it, to our very new Discord community server where we will all be interacting with you guys on a daily basis, not just once a week on this live stream. And so if you listen to the podcast when it drops, you will get that link, and we encourage everyone to join the Discord server. All right, guys, let's move on. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Riot in the news. And I thought this was interesting. Hang on. Actually, before I get to Riot, I want to do this one. Sorry. Epic Games in the news, because I thought this was a little bit different, and I know we had talked about the original story here. The headline here is, can Cary become a destination for esports events? New esports complex will be critical. And so this is a $193 million esports complex, supposedly, that's going to hold esports events, have facilities, teams, all kinds of things, all kinds of things to attract esports events and gamers. 4,000 seat arena, 25,000 square foot space for events. And it's going to be basically in the backyard of Epic Games headquarters. Remember that mall that they bought? Originally, this was planned for that mall, the grounds of that mall. And when Epic bought the mall, they could no longer do it there. So now this is all about this new space next to Epic Games. How do we feel about this in the context of some of the other spaces we've seen? And can Cary, North Carolina, which is not, it's not a huge city, do we think it can support an almost $200 million esports stadium? Jeff?
I mean, I think when you phrase it that way, the answer is undoubtedly no. I think, from just reading the article when you were kind of scrolling through, it sounds like there's a lot more, than just esports there. There clearly a bunch of basketball courts. There's, an amphitheater. It sounds like maybe an event center. Even still, 200 million for that is astronomically high. but it doesn't sound like it's just going to be esports. If it was just esports, that would be like, I think we would all be throwing up because that just is insane for an esports arena. But even with that said, it seems like a lot for a place that doesn't get a ton of, it's not exactly like Chicago or New York City or something like that, where you're getting a ton of people kind of coming through. So that seems crazy to me, even with Epic there. I'm sure they can host, some regional tournaments and whatnot, but it's a lot of money in a place that doesn't get a ton of kind of passing through.
Lindsay?
Maybe they're thinking about it more like a music festival model. Some of the biggest festivals are held in some of the weirdest places, and they're quite large revenue drivers. I mean, one of the big ones here is held at like a race car stadium. I could see this perhaps holding maybe one or two huge events a year and being really successful at that, but I don't know that that's enough to pay back what they're intending on investing in this.
I guess the part of the question is, this is a very particular location, and it's obviously, I think, there because of Epic. Does that change anything? Like, should we now see Microsoft have a stadium next door for esports events, or right? Like, does being near a gaming company mean this is the better place for these kinds of facilities? Jimmy, thoughts?
I can see them using it, sure. I just don't know if this fits. We've seen a lot of other businesses that are launching facilities that aren't this expensive in cities that make a lot more sense. I get that Epic has a presence there. Epic also has a presence in San Diego, and I would argue San Diego is probably a much more desirable location. It's one of the largest cities in the United States, certainly in California. And honestly, I don't know. We talk a lot about where to open facilities. Malls, I think, was a big discussion. I get this is kind of totally different because of the nature and the scope of what they're saying this facility is going to have. But it just, for the last 3 years now, it seems we're constantly shifting away from things like this to events going online. So it's a very large gamble, and I'm just curious what the risk tolerance as well as what the upside is, because I don't see why you wouldn't do this in a more populated area where if the esports kind of element of your facility fails, how can you pivot and make do? It's a very, just the risk to reward to me is out of whack, and for that reason I don't like it.
Let me just read this comment. Tom says, I had a call last week with YouGov and made sure they knew that I was introduced to them on this live stream. Tom, thank you so much. That is the nicest comment, and we really appreciate that. It's always nice when when people reach out and let them know that they heard it from us. Guys, I want to talk about this Riot story because I think this is the one I wanted to do after the Activision-Blizzard, but there was an issue here with the site. And it goes back to back with the Activision-Blizzard story in some ways because it involves culture. And the headline here is, Riot Games offers resignation bonuses as company announces new direction. The subheadline says, this comes not long after the League of Legends developer settled a gender discrimination lawsuit for $100 million. Basically, what they're doing is they call this their Q dodge, like dodging a queue, in League buyout program. And basically, employees who opt to leave the company right now because they're not on board with the CEO's stated vision, which is Nicolas Laurent's 5-year plan, or for whatever reason, they're offered 25% of their annual salary, 3 months of subsidized health benefits, and a whole bunch of other advantages for quitting, basically. So if they're not on board, they're basically offered to quit, and they're paid, a good chunk of their normal salary and health benefits for a good period of time. And the company is doing this because they're saying they want people to be on board with the plan, and they don't want people who don't agree with it to be at the company. They want Riot to be the right fit for them. I'm curious what you guys think of this Q Dodge program. Is this too drastic, or is it just the
I
right
kind of
amount of
love
drastic?
it. I think I I really like it. I think this is the kind of thing that good companies do. Because if you did this at a bad company, what would happen is the top 25% of people would all leave because they would say, hey, I can find a good opportunity. This place sucks. And I'm going to leave and take my 25%, salary or whatever, however many months they said, and go find
get
a
it
better
for a
place to
year.
work.
They get 25% of their annual salary, like upfront.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if a bad company did this, they would lose all their best people. A place like Riot, where people actually want to work, I imagine you lose sort of the riffraff to some extent, or maybe, you were going to, most companies have some sort of attrition anyway, / like people, sort of get fired to begin with, because there's always an annual kind of refresh. So I think you lose a lot of those people, and I think those are the kind of people you want to lose from your organization. And the best people are going to stay because Riot's a great place to work. I'm sure they offer competitive, salaries, stuff like that, and it's just a great company. Albeit some of the troubles that they had in the past. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that good companies do, and I think that it's great. I mean, I'd love to see more of that from companies. You have to have a lot of confidence, I think, to put a program like this in place.
Well, it's not just because they're a good company, which obviously is the reason why they can afford to do this, but it's also incredibly clever because you're asserting a severance without having to fire anyone and without opening up yourself to any discrimination or type of claim against you. And I can't remember one of you that made this point earlier when we were saying, Activision's not the only one that's had, some kind of public backlash for negative corporate culture. Riot had to hire their chief diversity officer, right? That was not more than 2 years ago. So I read this. I go, this is really clever because now those people know who they are. To your point, Jeff, they're already the noisemakers, and this is a generous severance on good terms. From their legal department, super clever, or legal and HR combined, super, super clever.
Lindsay, should Activision-Blizzard be doing this, you think? A Q dodge program at Activision-Blizzard?
Oh, man. No, I think Jeff made a good point, whereas if people are generally kind of happy, and I know that Riot has had a lot of issues. I don't remember exactly from when that lawsuit was settled either. I don't remember if it was for more recent allegations or for past allegations. From what I understood, it was a lot of past allegations, and I know Riot has introduced a lot of new directions, new programs, presumably hired a lot of new people recently. And they've been doing great. So hopefully that means the people there are happy. And there's been a lot less in the news about Riot and about how unhappy the workers are. Activision, it's not the same story. So I do not think that Activision should do this because I think it would hurt them greatly.
I mean, it's kind of brilliant, right? Because it's very much, in some ways, the spirit of startups, where when you're a very small team, you have to be on board with the CEO's vision, right? There's nowhere to hide in a startup. If you're not on board, you don't fit, it doesn't work, you probably get fired, never mind quit. But it brings a little bit of that. It sounds kind of draconian at face value, right? Like you're either on board with this plan or you're not. You're one of us or you're not. But there's beauty in that, in that it's a great way to sort of reset the culture, right? To reset what they're doing there and making sure everyone's rowing in the same direction. I really like the move. I really do. And I think it's, Jimmy, I didn't even think of sort of that clever sort of legal twist. But it's one of those things that I just think is smart from a business perspective. When G. Lee says, surely that's a great short-term move. The cost of keeping unhappy / unmotivated people. Just FYI, I think people massively underestimate the cost of keeping unhappy / unmotivated people. It's always underestimated. There is a huge cost when people are not happy and not motivated. So 12 weeks of equivalent, which is similar to redundancy in a lot of countries for people who stay. Sorry, you meant long-term move. Yeah, agreed. I think 1,000% agree that it is a very smart long-term move for them and will make the business stronger. All right, guys, let's, unless we have other thoughts, let's move on. I wanted to cut, this is not so much a story, but I think that we talked about this, and it's kind of a fun one. If you remember, we talked about ValkyRae right in the bit of the backlash she had against YouTube. Well, I saw this headline and I'm like, well, we should mention it. ValkyRae sets her fans up for disappointment. I think I should take a break, she's quoted. So supposedly she's shared some sad news with her fans. She's taking a leave from YouTube for an indefinite period. And that no one knows how long that's going to be. It shocked her millions of subscribers. After leaving Twitch, she signed a deal with YouTube, and it's not clear. It sounds like she has not signed a new deal. If you remember, her deal was up for renewal. It's also not sure if she's going to go to another platform. I'm just curious, guys, because we talked about the ValkyRae thing. I think we all said she seems very unhappy. It's kind of obvious. Mm-hmm. Who here thinks she didn't get a deal from YouTube because of maybe the complaining or whatever, and has decided to leave as a consequence? Or who thinks YouTube did offer her something and she's leaving anyways?
I want to go first if you guys don't mind.
Yeah.
I think she got offered a deal from YouTube. I think she's doing this as leverage. Musicians do this all the time. I can't tell you how many rappers are saying this is my last album ever, so the album sells well, right? I'm taking a break because I'm so great that I can afford to reweigh my options. It's just more drama out of her. I was such a big fan of hers before the last 3 months because I don't really appreciate how she's handling this negotiation strategy. But I think she's probably gotten offered a deal. YouTube's shelling out cash for these creators. We've seen it. We might not agree with it. Didn't work for Mixer, but YouTube is doing it. And regardless of whether or not she's happy, that's stuff that you can negotiate exactly during this contract renewal period, where she can reduce her streaming hours or make higher demands, get paid more. So I think this break is just drama and her kind of weighing her other options and trying to get a better deal for herself. But she's taking it out on her fans, and that's not right to me.
You know who's not complaining, guys? I'll put this next to it just because it was also kind of a fun one. A controversial Twitch streamer Amaranth reveals her massive per month income. Just so you guys know, she's making $1.5 million a month. This is what she told Vice in an interview. $1.5 million a month as a streamer. Jimmy, you have.
I was wondering if that was just on streaming or if that included OnlyFans and some other premium content.
Is this the one who sells her farts, or is that someone else?
No, that's someone. That's
Do you guys see that? Do you guys see that one?
Yes.
$1.5 million a month is her total.
It's a lot of.
She doesn't sell the farts anymore because she was injured.
Differently entirely. Yeah.
Injured in the bottling process.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Stuart says to listen to her chew. My gosh, yes, actually, $1.5 million a month. So a ValkyRae is walking away from a lot of money, and it makes sense that if you think Amaranth's sort of a good barometer of what a streamer of that caliber is making, but it does feel a little bit like playing games. I wonder if this backfires. Lindsay, I don't know if you think it's going to backfire on her.
I actually do. As Jimmy said, I haven't been a huge fan of the way she's handled things in recent months. That being said, it's either she is really playing with her fans or something's going on internally, so I don't want to offer too much harsh criticism. But this does not seem like a good move. That tweet was weird. Accepting the streamy or whatever it was weird. There's just been a lot of odd news surrounding her. And I hate to see that for a female streamer, and especially one who's this successful. It's really sad to me. I genuinely hope everything's going okay in her camp. And I hope that whatever's going on right now, that she can reevaluate, readjust, and come out with a bit better strategy and kind of rebuild the relationship with her fans.
It's funny you say that, because I one of the quotes from the Amaranth article I thought was interesting, and I'm just going to read it because I think it's worth reading out loud. She's quoted, this is a direct quote from Amaranth. She says, "I feel like a lot of people on Twitch villainize me. I am just here to throw, bleep, and save dogs. People underestimate just how much work goes into both streaming and running an OnlyFans empire. I make about 1.5 million a month currently, but with this job, there's no weekend, no vacations, no days off. Loneliness is something I struggle with. People just assume you just get on a screen, look pretty, and you collect $1 million.
Sounds like that's exactly what she does.
Did she just complain for making $1.5 million a month?
The other thing is, like,
That's
you could
the
do
cost.
that you could literally do that for 6 months and then go retire. So, like,
This is true. Also true.
That's
I
what
don't
I
have
always
a
think
ton
about.
of
I'm like,
sympathy.
man,
You could
you
take
could
a
just
month
like
off.
really work for 120 hours a week for like a year and just be done. That would be great.
I'm so pretty and popular.
Comments
is
like
what
this
she
just piss.
said.
They're so. It's just so out of touch with reality when we're dealing with
Yep.
so many people that are, working so hard and not
Yep.
doing well. Like, I'm all for people's mental health, and like, I think I was even on the side of ValkyRae. With, if you need to take a step back and figure out yourself for your mental health, then do it. But like, don't try to come out as like, oh, I'm so disadvantaged because I have to, like, you don't know how hard it is to like get on a stream and make millions of dollars a month. Like, that may be true. It may not be easy, but that doesn't mean you should go out and say it, because I guarantee you working 18 hours a day in like a coal mine is a hell of a lot harder. And you're
I'm
making
so
Even if it is-
$7 an hour.
Even if it is hard, that's why you're making $1.5 million a month,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that you're getting compensated for it.
I'm so surprised that you guys are having such a visceral reaction to this, though. I just read it as like, yeah, I make a lot of money. Yeah, it's also hard. Like, it didn't seem that dramatic. to me
Making
at
lots of
all.
money is hard. Like I didn't think that was a
Right,
huge
yeah.
news
I think
flash.
it's just-
Like
I think people think that it's also always fun, and I think her point is like, okay, yeah, it's fun sometimes, but it's also not that fun a lot of times. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I didn't think that
I don't
this was
love
like everyone feel
answering
bad for
200
me.
emails a day, right? Like
Yeah, I didn't read this as like everybody feel bad for me. I read this as it's not as fun as it looks, but it's definitely worth it.
yeah, you're right, Lindsay. But I think
Fair.
we're not trying to mischaracterize it, right? I don't think she said "woe is me" directly, at least, right? Wenji Lee says, I didn't think I'd be on this late and got on late, so missed the Activision segment. Definitely looking forward to going back and watching the recording. Definitely. It was we did an hour on it, and would love your feedback. Bobby helped get me out of the hole my Activision shares are in for. So as a shareholder, great news for us. If this show ever shifted a bit earlier, we'd definitely try to show up more. It's late for the UK. It's a good point. At some point we may have to add a second stream of some sort, and have toyed with the idea, but appreciate the feedback and would love what you think about the Activision conversation. He also says Amaranth has an alt Twitter where she talks about her investments, private equity stocks, and buying assets like gas stations. Generally sounds very business savvy. I think she's obviously very, very bright, right? Like obviously very business savvy. Again, I don't think you make $1.5 million a month by accident, right? Like none of this happens unless she really knows what she's doing and has honed that craft in a very significant way. Stuart says, spot on, Jeff. Hashtag the juice. we're going to get hashtag the juice to catch on. Definitely. If that's the last thing we do here. All right, guys. One more Microsoft story. This is I just have two quick stories, and I want to end on sort of a silly one. But there's one more Microsoft story here that I think was worth talking about that wasn't the Activision-Blizzard acquisition, and that is Microsoft has discontinued all Xbox One consoles. So basically, they're going to stop manufacturing all Xbox One consoles. They're going to focus only on Xbox Series S and Series X. And why this is interesting is Sony came out and said that they're going to still make 1 million PS4 consoles this year, like in 2022. They're still producing PS4s because they see it as a way to, provide a more budget product to a more budget-minded consumer, and it's less there's less supply constraints with making the PS4, which is an older product, older chip, etc. So it's easier for them to make PS4s given the supply constraints than it is to make PS5s. But Microsoft has taken sort of this very different strategy and said, we're not making any old consoles anymore. And I'm curious which one, on what side of the fence you guys fall on here. You think the Sony strategy of making more PS4s is brilliant because we get more people into the ecosystem, or is it Xbox is smart, we only want people on current gen?
I'm a fan of Xbox's play here. I think if anyone wants an old gen, that's what GameStop and eBay and things like that are for. I think Sony's just trying, a short-term cash grab because that's the only place they can really make money right now. They're not really offering a whole lot. Xbox is doubling down on their product and on their future and saying, it's like, hey, we're giving you the premium experience and this is where we're headed. So another one for Microsoft today, in my opinion, or at least another great move.
Jeff, I saw you smirking a bit. What is the thought here?
I'm smirking.
Yeah.
I was thinking in my head how we've really come full circle, because I feel like for the last 3 years, anytime there was a debate ever between Microsoft and Sony, I feel like all of us would always be like, well, Sony is the one who gets games and they're going with exclusive content and they're just all in on this strategy of having the best content. God of War, Spider-Man, let's go. Sony won the console war. PS5's killing Xbox. Halo sucks. It's never coming. Microsoft has nothing. They're just going after Game Pass. I read 100 articles where I feel like that was the take 18 months ago, and now it's just the narrative has been completely flipped. And obviously we talked about that an hour ago, so I won't get too into it. I was also laughing at Joseph's comment because I think it's pretty hilarious. The names are just so bad.
Joseph says names are so similar. I hope they don't discontinue the wrong one. It is true. The names are bad, genuinely bad. The branding on Xbox consoles is horrible. They need someone in marketing to fix this. Even in the current cycle.
Hard. You just count up.
Yeah,
well,
you don't need a branding genius.
Yeah, they really screwed it up when they went from one to 360. That was not the right stuff.
Well, now they're
And
letters.
I think I understand why, because it was they were always behind Sony, so it's you can't be Xbox 2 when Sony's on PlayStation 3. I could see how that would trick people, but just make it 3.
That happened in the chip space between Intel and AMD, and all AMD did was they just skipped a few numbers and then went one number higher than
that's
Intel.
What I would have said.
Right?
Just do that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's even precedent for this in the tech sphere. When G Lee says, does this just go with Microsoft plan to move us all to Game Pass, Netflix of games on TVs, etc., with streaming, i.e. they don't really care about the hardware and are just going to tie you into subscription? That's an interesting thought, right? Is the fact that they don't care if they can't make enough consoles, because we could conclude, we could assume that maybe that because they're not producing old ones anymore and they can't produce enough of the new ones, they don't really care if you have the hardware or not anymore. Lindsay, I don't know if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of tying it in. And I think, Apple did the whole, we're not going to focus on hardware, we're going to become a software kind of business years and years ago. Obviously, they've gone back to also producing really great hardware and having a cult following for that. So, but I think if Xbox is trying to do this, then yeah, like Jimmy said too, they're doubling down on their strategy, and why not focus on the new and getting more subscriptions and pushing it out to more devices anyway?
Yeah, it's just, if they don't have the beachhead of the hardware in your living room, is it just as easy to sell Game Pass subscriptions? Right? If they, at some point, they really stop caring about selling enough consoles for everyone who wants one. And I would argue there's probably going to be increased demand for Xbox consoles now, right? I would assume, because of this transaction, even before Game Pass announces anything new or different. If they don't care, it must mean that Game Pass really is going to be everywhere, right? That is the strategy. Is that fair to say? All right, guys, let me just read some of these. When Julie says, why they buy all these content makers too? Yeah, exactly. That it's about the content and the games, maybe becoming less and less about the hardware. Stuart says, I like it. My kids think the PS4 is still great, so I get more time on the PS5. Stuart, this is what your Tesla's for. You go into the garage. Never mind. Lindsay. All right, guys. Let's I think I had just one silly story I wanted to wrap up on here, and that is Dr. Disrespect in the news. And I'm a sucker for doc stories here, but this is also related to F1, which I think we all in this room love. And so Dr. Disrespect made a bold claim, and let me just put up the story here. So the headline is Dr. Disrespect makes bold Mercedes claim after F1 esports youngsters stunning achievement. Okay. And so what this article is about is there's an F1 esports sim racer, Sem Bolukbasi. I know I mispronounced that, but he basically achieved so much in his sim racing career that he's transitioning from F1 esports to driving a Formula 2 car, like a real Formula 2 car. And this is the first time this has ever happened. He's going to compete in the 2022 F2 season. And so Jake Lucky, put this tweet up about this sim racer going to F2, and Dr. Disrespect chimed in, and this is what he said. He said, I remember when I was number one on the leaderboards for Project Gotham Racing 3 on Xbox 360. The Mercedes-Benz team called me. I simply told them I don't drive a Mercedes. That was that. All of this to say, even Dr. Disrespect doesn't want to drive a Merc. But I'm curious if you think, guys, that this was a minor story given what came out this week. But are we seeing watershed moments here, right? Like, is this another moment where we're going to look back and go, this was major? A sim racer going to F2? This is not a test. This is not, a one-off to show that it's possible. He's competing in the whole F2 season. Do you guys think we'll see more of this? Do we like this? Or does this hurt esports, right? Does this imply that esports is like lesser than the real thing?
I think it's awesome. I had a recent talk with a major car manufacturer that I don't think I should discuss, but they were looking very heavily into this space and how the fundamental skills of sim racing are consistent with racing itself, and that it would be a good way to take a very expensive sport and put it in front of a bunch of people. Even though these sims are still expensive, it's not quite as bad as fielding a car or going somewhere. And that it was an opportunity to bring, I think, a type of sport that not a lot of people follow just because of the price barrier, and really help it grow and take advantage of technology, the metaverse, etc. One of the ideas was, for example, watching a famous broadcasted race and having sim racers with obviously the racers at the track don't see this, but on the screen, or if you're in that portal, you can see your digital car racing and competing against them in real time. And steps in that direction, steps to getting these sim racers into actual cars. So I'm all about it. I think there are a lot of racing fans in this group, and hopefully in our chat and following. And if you can transition from sim racing to actual racing, like, that's just a ridiculous application of gaming and going into other industries. I don't know. Again, I read a lot of these stories, not like it's a good idea or not. Just like, this is so cool, regardless of if it's a sustainable business. This is so cool. Who wouldn't think that's cool?
But Jimmy, coolness aside, right? Wouldn't the bigger moment be when an F2, like someone competing in a full season of F2, real racing, right? Real life racing, decides that instead of going to F1 next season, right, which is the ultimate, in real life racing, decides he's going to go to F1 esports. He or she,
I don't know.
Right? Wouldn't that be like the ultimate? That's the ultimate moment.
We're definitely years away from that, but that would be the ultimate moment for sure. Why not? I mean, for us as gamers, for us as but I don't know, because down the line, it just could be two different types of people. Those that want the thrill of the danger versus those that just want the fastest lap time or yeah.
What we do know is Lamborghini, which I think is Dr. Disrespect's favorite vehicle, clearly needs to field an F1 team at some point for him to be happy. Martin says, just tuned in. Did I miss discussion on Microsoft buying Activision-Blizzard? Also, long time no see. Hello, Martin. long time no see. It's so great to have you. You did miss it. It was the first hour of the show, so if you watch the recording, it's easy to find. We talk about it for the whole full hour at the top of the show. Stuart says, this was awesome. I'm heavily in the sim racing scene, and this is an awesome development. Race driver sim race, so the synergy is real and it brings an audience with it. Yeah, I do like seeing it. Don't get me wrong. I just think it'd be so much cooler to see it even the reverse way. Stuart says it's because of how good the simulators are. To go fast in either requires the same level of skill. Totally agree. Some of these simulators, some of these sim rigs are just ridiculously good. And we're talking about rigs that cost, $100,000 or more. Tom says, I was really looking forward to the discussion here tonight about the Microsoft Activision news. You always deliver. Thanks. Tom, thank you for saying that. I think we had too much fun with it. And we had all been waiting to talk about it for a couple of days now. Guys, that wraps up this week's episode. Unfortunately, it flew by. Highly recommend everyone tune into the podcast tomorrow. Like I said, it's a lot of fun. Co-founder of OTK. And in that podcast, you're going to hear the link for our brand new Discord community server. We want everyone to come join that. Also, make sure, guys, to follow us everywhere you get Business of Esports content, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok. Subscribe to the podcasts on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate everyone who comes and asks questions and gets involved in the live stream. Honestly, you guys have no idea how much we enjoy it and how much fun we have doing it when you guys are coming and participating. And make sure you subscribe to Meta Woman and Meta Business. If you haven't already, would love your feedback on those new shows. I co-host Meta Business with the Juice himself. So if you love the Juice, if you're hashtagging the Juice, if you're hashtagging you got juiced, you have to watch Meta Business. And Lindsay, our very own Lindsay Poss, is hosting Meta Woman, which you should be sending and sharing with everyone you know. They are doing an amazing job of highlighting incredible women in the gaming and metaverse space, and the stories are interesting. The people are interesting. I highly recommend you guys go and listen to that. You can get both of those shows anywhere you get your podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, you name it, on every podcast platform under the sun. I will just read these. Wenji Lee says, thanks. Going to try stay up late and catch these more often. They're even better live. Thank you. I agree. They are the best live, but we also appreciate that you guys listen to them after the fact. Thanks, guys. A great show, says Stuart. And Martin says, okay, we'll listen to replay. Haven't tuned in so long. And every time I hear someone say metaverse in the news, I think of you, Paul. Martin, thank you. That I appreciate that. I hope everyone, when they hear metaverse, they see my ugly mug here. All right, guys, that wraps up this week's episode. We really appreciate all of you, and make sure to, if you're here, whether you're new or you're a longtime listener, viewer, every Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, make sure to come. We love having you all here, and we will see you next week.